During World War II, while Berlin lived under constant blackouts and intense surveillance from the Nazi regime, a series of brutal crimes began to draw the attention of the authorities. Between 1939 and 1941, women were repeatedly attacked on the suburban trains of the German capital, under circumstances that revealed an increasingly violent and disturbing pattern. The man responsible for these crimes was Paul Ogorzow, a railway employee and member of the Nazi Party. To his co-workers and neighbors, he appeared to be just an ordinary man, married and a father of two. However, behind this appearance of normalcy, Ogorzow hid behavior marked by misogyny and violent impulses that would lead him to commit rape and serial murder. The victims were mostly women who used the trains during the nightly blackouts. Ogorzow took advantage of the darkness and isolation to attack them with extreme brutality, using knives, iron bars, and other objects. With each crime, the atmosphere of fear grew stronger, but the dissemination of the cases was limited by Nazi censorship, which feared harming the regime's image of order and security. Paul Ogorzow was born on September 29th in the village of Muntowin in Poland, but then part of the German Empire. The illegitimate son of a rural laborer, he grew up never knowing the identity of his biological father. At 12 years old, Ogorzow was adopted and moved to the Havelland region, near Berlin, where he worked on his adoptive father's farm. As he grew older, Ogorzow found employment in a blast furnace at the Brandenburg Steel Works. In April 1932, he joined the Nazi Party and later became a member of the SA, the Nazi paramilitary organization. On January 30th, 1933, Adolf Hitler was appointed Chancellor of Germany by President Paul von Hindenburg. In 1934, shortly after the Nazis consolidated their power, Paul Ogorzow secured a position at the Deutsches Reichsbahn, the national railway company of Germany. He began his career as a track laborer, responsible for maintaining and installing rail lines in Berlin. Through steady and diligent work, he gradually rose within the organization, becoming a signaling assistant in a freight yard in the Rummelsburg district. His supervisors considered him reliable and competent, and colleagues often described him as friendly and conscientious, someone capable of operating both light signals and telegraphic communications simultaneously, a task requiring significant focus and skill. In 1937, Ogorzow married Gertrude Ziegelmann, a shop clerk 2 years older than he was. The marriage produced 2 children, a boy and a girl. The couple initially lived with Ogorzow's mother in a modest working-class neighborhood of Berlin, surrounded by community gardens, apartment blocks, and small working-class houses. Later, they moved to an apartment in Karlshorst, a suburban district that would later become associated with his future crimes. At first glance, Ogorzow seemed to embody the role of an ordinary family man. Neighbors often recalled seeing him playing with his children, tending to the small garden in front of the building, or picking cherries from the little orchard behind the house. He was seen as approachable, kind, and typical of the working-class community. Every day, Ogorzow commuted to work by train, on foot, or by bicycle, maintaining a calm and stable routine that further reinforced his reputation as a diligent and trustworthy citizen. However, despite his seemingly stable domestic life, a darker side soon began to emerge behind closed doors. At his later trial, his wife Gertrude testified that he often became violent and abusive, obsessively accusing her, without any reason, of being unfaithful. Still, within the neighborhood, Paul Ogorzow continued to be regarded as dependable and insignificant. One neighbor recalled standing beside him while her father posted a wanted notice for an unknown attacker, casually remarking that the criminal might live nearby. Ogorzow, standing right there, simply replied, "You may be right." His violent impulses, initially limited to harassment and assault, soon escalated into something far more sinister. During his first attacks, between August 1939 and July 1940, Ogorzow had attempted to murder his victims, but failed. 3 women he had stabbed in the garden colonies between survived and later testified against him. World War II began on September 1st, 1939, and the following year, Ogorzow's attacks became even more brutal. In August 1940, aboard Berlin's S-Bahn, Paul Ogorzow beat and raped a woman, mistakenly believing she had died after losing consciousness. The next month, he escalated the violence further by attempting to strangle another woman and throw her from a moving train. These were the first attacks he committed on the railway network, a hunting ground that would become his trademark. On the night of September 20th, 1940, Gerda Kargol boarded a train home after a long day. Tired and disoriented, she accidentally passed her station. To avoid a fine, she tried to return by boarding another train. Ogorzow, dressed in his railway uniform, appeared offering help and invited her into a second-class compartment, where he would have more privacy to act. As the train headed toward Karlshorst station, Ogorzow grabbed Kargol, trying to strangle her into unconsciousness. When the struggle took longer than he expected, and the train neared the next station, he panicked, believing he had killed her, and threw her body from the moving train. Miraculously, Kargol survived, landing on a sand mound. Since she had not been raped and her belongings were found nearby, the authorities concluded it was either an accident or a fall caused by drunkenness. This attack marked a decisive turning point. Forensic psychiatrist Dr. Waldemar Weimann later concluded that throwing Kargol's seemingly lifeless body from the train made Ogorzow realize he derived satisfaction from the act of killing. From that point on, he would target women not only to rape them, but to murder them. His first confirmed murder occurred on October 3, 1940. Ogorzow visited the home of Gertrude Ditter, a 20-year-old woman and mother of 2 whose husband was serving in the army. Under the cover of a blackout, he managed to enter her kitchen and, after lulling her into a false sense of security, attacked her. He strangled her with such force that her hyoid bone fractured. Although she was still alive after the strangulation attempt, Ditter was then fatally stabbed in the neck with a knife that Ogorzow had brought with him. Her body was discovered the next day by an employee of the Nazi welfare organization. The initial assumptions of suicide were quickly dismissed, and the case was handed over to the Berlin Criminal Police. Despite some promising leads at first, including her own husband, the investigation soon went cold, and the case remained unsolved. Exactly 1 month later, Ogorzow resumed his attacks on the Berlin railway network. On December 4, 1940, he attacked 30-year-old Elisabeth Bendorf, a train ticket vendor returning from Friedrichshagen station. As in the case of Kargol, Ogorzow struck her with a thick piece of lead-coated telephone cable. However, Bendorf survived multiple blows from her assailant, who ran out of time before the next station stop and decided to throw her unconscious body out of the train car. His next victim, however, would not be so fortunate. On the night of December 4th, the same day he attacked Bendorf, he murdered 26-year-old nurse Elfriede Franke. Armed with an iron bar found at his workplace, Ogorzow struck her violently on the head inside a second-class compartment at Karlshorst station, forcing fragments of her skull into her brain. He then dragged her body to the door and threw her onto the tracks. Franke's brutal murder alarmed investigators, and forensic experts began to suspect a pattern. Just a few hours later, Ogorzow claimed another victim. 19-year-old Irmgard Friese was walking alone when Ogorzow repeatedly struck her with the same iron bar he had used to kill Franke. He raped her before returning to work at the railway signal post. Friese was found still alive, but died of her injuries without ever regaining consciousness. Meanwhile, the previously mentioned Elisabeth Bendorf had survived Ogorzow's attack, and her testimony added to the growing evidence that someone was attacking women on Berlin's trains, and Ogorzow repeatedly struck her with the same. Investigators recovered the improvised weapon used against Bendorf, a heavy piece of telephone cable marked with identification numbers. By tracing the cable's origin, they discovered it had been installed near Rummelsburg station, bringing authorities closer to locating the attacker's base of operations. However, Ogorzow had still not been identified, and remained free to strike again. Now convinced that a serial attacker was operating on the railway network, the police intensified their efforts. Dr. Weimann and Kriminalkommissar Wilhelm Lütke began to suspect that the murder of Gertrude Ditter and the attacks on the trains might be connected, but conclusive proof was still lacking. On December 22, 1940, just before Christmas, Ogorzow murdered Elisabeth Bungener, a woman traveling to visit her husband stationed near Berlin. Bludgeoned with a blunt object and thrown from the train, Bungener initially appeared to have committed suicide, but forensic examination revealed clear evidence of homicide. A week later, on December 29, 1940, Ogorzow attacked and murdered 40-year-old Gertrude Sievert, a woman traveling between the Berlin districts of Karlshorst and Rummelsburg. As with his previous victims, he incapacitated her with a blow to the head and threw her from a moving train. Though she survived the initial attack, Sievert later died in the hospital. On January 4, 1941, Ogorzow targeted 27-year-old Hedwig Ebauer. Pregnant at the time, Ebauer was strangled and thrown from a train near Wuhlheide station. Although she initially survived the fall, she soon died afterward. This was Ogorzow's third attack in the early hours of a Sunday, suggesting a recurring behavioral pattern. Despite growing public unease and rumors about a serial killer on the trains, Nazi authorities, under orders from propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels, imposed a media blackout to avoid damaging the image of law and order in Nazi Germany. Meanwhile, Berlin police struggled to capture the elusive murderer. Ogorzow narrowly avoided arrest when he approached an undercover female officer posing as a lone traveler, but managed to escape. On February 11, 1941, 39-year-old Johanna Voigt, who was pregnant, was murdered after boarding a train with Ogorzow. Trusting him because of his railway uniform, she was attacked almost immediately. After repeated blows to the head, she was thrown from the train and succumbed to her injuries. Following Voigt's death, investigators noticed a troubling pattern: missing train tickets among the victims. This suggested that the killer might be a railway employee with access to restricted areas of the trains. Efforts were intensified to interrogate and monitor thousands of Reichsbahn employees, but progress remained slow. With the increasing police presence, Ogorzow temporarily halted his attacks, waiting for surveillance to subside. Months passed, and the sense of urgency weakened. On July 1, 1941, Berlin's Kriminalkommissar Lütke orchestrated a risky tactic, spreading the false rumor that the manhunt had ended. Believing the danger had passed, Ogorzow struck again 2 days later. On July 3, 1941, he murdered 35-year-old Frieda Koziol. After following her as she left Rummelsburg station alone, he approached her from behind, wearing his railway uniform. When Koziol refused his offer to escort her home and continued walking, Ogorzow struck the back of her head with his iron bar, crushing her skull. As she lay dying, he raped her and left her body at the scene, naked from the waist down. A trail of footprints found near Koziol's body temporarily led police to another suspect, but further investigation cleared him. After Koziol's murder, investigators began to focus their attention on railway employees, which led them to Paul Ogorzow, known among co-workers for making misogynistic remarks and openly expressing a disturbing fascination with killing. One co-worker eventually reported that Ogorzow had been seen climbing over the fence at the Rummelsburg depot during work hours, a suspicious act he tried to justify by claiming he was secretly meeting a lover whose husband was serving in the army. Chief investigator Wilhelm Lütke personally examined Ogorzow's uniforms and found numerous bloodstains, further heightening suspicions. On July 12, 1941, Ogorzow was arrested by the criminal police. During a tense and psychologically aggressive interrogation, conducted under the glare of a single lamp, Ogorzow was confronted with a woman who had survived one of his attacks, and with a tray displaying the skulls of several of his murdered victims. In a summarized report submitted on July 17th, the criminal police cited his motives as excessive sexual desire, a pathological hatred of women, and a sexual attraction to the resistance of his victims. Although Ogorzow confessed voluntarily, he attempted to blame his actions on alcoholism, and even accused a Jewish doctor of having treated him incompetently for gonorrhea. A few days before his formal indictment, he was officially expelled from the Nazi Party and subsequently pleaded guilty to 8 murders, 6 attempted murders, and 31 sexual offenses. The official narrative emphasized that Ogorzow was a traitor to German society, and he was declared an enemy of the people by Nazi authorities. Paul Ogorzow was 28 years old when, on July 26, 1941, he was executed by guillotine at Plötzensee prison in Berlin. As was common practice at the time, a bill for the wear and tear of the guillotine blade was sent to the prisoner's family. In this case, to Mrs. Gertrude Ogorzow. Society. Help us keep this project alive here on YouTube by subscribing to the channel. Thanks for watching, God bless you all, and see you soon. 26th, 1941, he was executed by guillotine at Plötzensee prison in Berlin. As was common practice at the time, a bill for the wear and tear of the guillotine blade was sent to the prisoner's family. In this case, to Mrs. Gertrude Ogorzow. Help us keep this project alive here on YouTube by subscribing to the channel. Thanks for watching, God bless you all, and see you soon.